Sugar built empires and destroyed millions of lives. After this video, your perspective on sugar will completely change. Because that small white crystal you put in your coffee today was once more valuable than gold. The history of sugar is not just the story of a sweet taste. For centuries, this substance remained a resource known and produced only in certain regions. This situation connected access to sugar not only to economic power, but also to possessing knowledge of production and suitable geographical conditions. Now, to understand the history of sugar, let us look at the lands where it first became possible and how this knowledge emerged. The first page of this sweet tale was not written, as one might think, in the luxurious courts of Europe or in steel-geared factories. Our story began in the mists of time, 10,000 years ago, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, in the steamy and mysterious rainforests of New Guinea. In those times, Saccharum officinarum, meaning sugar cane, whispering with the wind, was not an ordinary plant for the local people, but a mythological hero. Legends whispered that humankind was born from the love between a sugar cane stalk and a fish. When the natives broke this hard-shelled green spear, they were captivated by the life-giving juice flowing from within. However, it was not yet a food, but a sacred energy source that nourished spirits in rituals. Sugar was a raw and wild gift offered by nature to humankind. The spread of this green secret across the oceans began in the canoes of brave sailors, but the real spark that changed its fate struck on the shores of India. History records that in 510 years before Christ, the soldiers of the Persian Emperor Darius encountered a shocking sight in India. The soldiers, trembling, reported what they had seen. "My lord, here there is a magical reed that gives honey without the help of bees." This sentence summarized how the ancient world viewed sugar. It was a miracle that defied the laws of nature. Indian masters became the first to tame this miracle. During the Gupta dynasty, they boiled the juice of the cane, cooled it, and crystallized it, giving it permanence. It was no longer a plant liquid that decayed, but a treasure that could be carried in pockets. These crystals, which they named sarkara, meaning gravel in Sanskrit, became the ancestor of the words shekhar, sugar, and zucker. This crystallized miracle flowed through the dusty paths of the Silk Road and spice caravans into the Middle East, the land of the tales of 1001 nights. Arab engineers built enormous water wheels to keep this delicate plant alive in the desert and turned sugar into an art. In the workshops of Egypt and Syria, sugar was boiled and refined repeatedly until it became pure white. At that point, it was no longer just a taste, but a symbol of wealth and purity. When European knights, who forced open the mysterious gates of the East during the Crusades, tasted this new spice, their fate was sealed. As they returned home, they carried not only memories of war, but also that sweet poison that would forever change European cuisine and history. When these crystals from the mysterious chests of the East reached the ports of Europe, they were welcomed not by cooks, but by robed alchemists and physicians. In the dark and foggy Europe of the 12th century, the chance of an ordinary person encountering sugar was almost the same as seeing a dragon in the forest. In those times, sugar was not part of the kitchen, but part of the sacred books of healing known as materia medica. According to the physicians of the time, this white powder was a medical miracle that warmed digestion and healed melancholic spirits. What we call a sugar-coated pill today was born in those dim apothecary rooms. Apothecaries coated syrups that were as bitter as poison with this expensive powder so that patients could drink them. Sugar was such a vital substance that the phrase, "like an apothecary without sugar," became a common expression used to describe absolute helplessness. However, sugar's fate was not to remain trapped in dusty medicine bottles. It soon became the most dazzling toy of kings and queens. On Renaissance tables, sugar was not just a sweetener, but a pure display of power. Massive castles, mounted knights, and mythological creatures carved entirely from sugar, called subtlety, were placed at the center of banquet tables. When guests ate these sculptures, they were actually consuming the host's wealth, because at that time, a single sugar sculpture was worth a lifetime of gold earned by a worker. Yet this white gold also left a dark mark on the aristocracy. Excessive sugar consumption began to rot and blacken the teeth of nobles. But the strange and ironic part was that these decays were not seen as a shameful flaw, but as a symbol of status to be envied. If someone's teeth were black, it meant that they were rich and powerful enough to afford sugar. The most powerful woman of the time, Queen Elizabeth I of England, set palace fashion with her smile of completely blackened teeth. There were even whispers in the streets that some people who could not afford sugar painted their teeth black with coal just to appear noble. Sugar was at the peak of Europe, the medicine of kings and the sweet curse of queens. However, this magnificent dream would not last forever. Storms from across the oceans and a changing world order were about to take sugar down from the palaces and mix it among the people. And at exactly this point, sugar stopped being sweet. While kings in European palaces were feasting with sugar sculptures, the price of this sweetness was being paid on the other side of the ocean, under the scorching sun of the Caribbean. Sugar was, by nature, a delicate and cruel plant. From the moment it was harvested, it had to be processed quickly, and this meant an inhuman and merciless speed. To obtain this white gold, European traders established the darkest trade network in history, known as the triangular trade. Ships traveled from Europe to Africa carrying weapons and textiles. From there, transported chained people as slaves to the Americas and the Caribbean, and, on their return, brought sugar and rum back to Europe. In this terrible cycle, sugar completely lost its innocence. As one English writer of that time said, "In every grain of sugar you put in your tea, there is the blood and tears of a slave. The plantations in Barbados and Jamaica were like factories of death. Sugar cane fields were so profitable that plantation owners saw the lives of slaves as expendable costs. The sweet pleasure melting on Europe's tongues was actually fermented by the theft of millions of human lives and freedoms. Sugar was no longer just a food, but a global power that fed empires, drew borders, and divided humanity. When history turned to the 19th century, dark clouds gathered over Europe, but this time the issue was not land, but taste. The continent had entered the most bitter period of its history. While Napoleon Bonaparte's armies were winning victories on land, control of the seas had been lost to the British. The ocean was no longer a passage, but an iron wall formed by British warships. This wall cut Europe's lifeline. Sugar ships were no longer arriving. Imagine waking up one morning and finding that all sweetness in the world had disappeared. Palace kitchens were silent, bakeries were sorrowful, and apothecaries were helpless. Those white crystals that kings once used to show off were now treated like diamonds on the black market. Europe was trapped in a cold and tasteless nightmare called sugarlessness. At that moment of despair, Emperor Napoleon turned not to his generals, but to the magicians of science in his laboratories. His command was as sharp and impossible as a command of conquest. Find me a sugar that comes from our own land, so that we are no longer dependent on the seas of the British. The answer came not from exotic islands or sunny beaches, but from Europe's cold and muddy fields, from a root crushed underfoot, the beet. Until then, it had been a rough, shapeless, muddy root, eaten only by animals. No one believed that this ugly duckling contained the same spirit and the same sweetness as the delicate sugar cane grown under the tropical sun. But chemists solved nature's great game of hide and seek. Those dirty roots pulled from the soil were thrown into massive cauldrons, boiled, processed, and eventually transformed like the philosopher's stone. As smoke rose from factory chimneys, pure white, local sugar flowed out of the doors. This was not just production, it was rebellion. Humanity had rebelled against the fate of climate and geography. It was no longer necessary to cross oceans or enslave people to reach sweetness. Sweetness was hidden in the fields just behind the house. That day, the throne of white gold was shaken, and sugar began its long journey from the monopoly of emperors to the tables of the people. With beet sugar, prices began to fall, and a new cultural storm began in Europe, especially in England. Tea. Tea was originally a bitter herbal medicine from China. It did not suit European taste at all. But when the Portuguese Princess Catherine of Braganza married the King of England and came to London, she brought a strange habit in her dowry, drinking tea. The nobles in the palace tried to imitate their new queen and drink this bitter liquid, but they made faces. At that moment, sugar entered the scene as a savior. When sugar was added to bitter tea, it instantly turned the drink into something enjoyable, even addictive. This union of sugar and tea fundamentally changed the social structure of the British Empire. At first, this pair was only consumed by duchesses in porcelain cups while gossiping, but as sugar became cheaper, it spread downward. No longer only in palaces, but also in middle-class homes. Life stopped when the clock showed 5 in the afternoon, and teapots were placed on the stove. Sugar was the magical wand that turned bitterness into sweetness, the foreign into familiar, and luxury into a daily habit. With Napoleon's beet revolution and the reopening of ocean trade, the world encountered something it had never seen before: an abundance of sugar. Competition intensified. Production techniques became industrialized, and prices dropped rapidly. This meant the end of centuries of aristocratic monopoly. Sugar came out of locked cabinets and entered the streets. However, this meeting of sweetness with the people did not happen as a romantic reunion, but within the smoky gears of the Industrial Revolution. By the middle of the 20th century, factories in Europe and America were running non-stop, and massive machines were exploiting human labor. Workers needed fast, cheap, and powerful energy to endure this inhuman pace. That energy was sugar. Once elegantly consumed by duchesses, tea time had now become the survival break of factory workers. Strong tea filled with cheap sugar and a thick layer of jam. This was the black fuel that allowed a tired miner or textile worker to stand up again. Sugar stopped being just a flavor and became the calorie of industrial capitalism. In this period, sweetness also became a way for the middle class to reward themselves. Chocolate, once a spiced drink consumed only by the wealthy, was transformed into a solid bar in the year 1847 and entered everyone's pocket. The tradition of giving sweets to children during holidays and celebrations was born in this era of abundance. The world was living its sweetest period, yet no one realized that these white crystals were planting the seeds of a silent health disaster. Sugar, which entered our lives with the Industrial Revolution, changed its form by the end of the 20th century and appeared with a deceptive mask. In the 1970s and 1980s, the world fell into a low-fat obsession out of fear of heart attacks. Scientists and governments were shouting, "Avoid fat, and you will be healthy." Food industries immediately took action. They removed fat from yogurts, biscuits, and sauces, but there was a major problem. Food without fat tasted like straw, and no one wanted to eat it. So what did food engineers do to bring back the taste? The answer was simple: sugar. Those products labeled as fat-free and healthy were actually filled with sugar and fructose syrup. While people thought they were eating healthy, they were pumping pure energy into their bodies. This was the greatest marketing illusion of modern history. While we were avoiding fat, sugar entered our kitchens through the back door and took control of our metabolism. The fuse of the obesity epidemic was lit by these seemingly innocent diet products. The democratization of sugar that began in factories turned into an uncontrolled love story by the 20th century. Humanity found itself in an abundance that our ancestors could never have imagined. However, our biology was not prepared for this new world. Our brains had been programmed for tens of thousands of years with a reward mechanism for that rare, sweet energy found in nature. For our ancestors, finding a fruit meant survival. For us, candy on every corner became a trap that turned on the dopamine switches in our brains to their maximum level. The food industry quickly discovered this weakness. Sugar was no longer only in sweets. It was hidden in bread, sauces, crackers, and even in so-called healthy, processed foods. Without realizing it, we were exposed to a constant bombardment of sugar from breakfast to dinner. The result was a global health disaster. Diseases like diabetes and obesity, once known as the illnesses of kings, became epidemics affecting even elementary school children. Our bodies began to collapse under an energy load they could not process. Fatty liver disease, heart conditions, and metabolic syndromes became the bitter cost of our sweet life. Sugar, once a life-giving energy source, slowly turned into a silent toxin. Scientists now place sugar in the same category as addictive substances such as cigarettes and alcohol, putting this white poison on trial once again. So, will this sweet tale end in bitterness? Must humanity give up this love that has lasted for thousands of years? Today, in laboratories, just like the first chemists who produced sugar from beet centuries ago, there is a search for a new kind of alchemy. Scientists are chasing magical molecules, artificial sweeteners that imitate the pleasure of sugar without making our bodies pay the price. From stevia leaves to monk fruit, the hidden corners of nature are being rediscovered. However, none of these new solutions has fully replaced that ancient white crystal. Even if our tongue tastes it, our mind continues to search for that old satisfaction. Moreover, the issue is not only our health, but also the health of the planet. Sugarcane and beet fields have long been greedy giants that consume soil and water resources. The sugar of the future must be not only calorie-free, but also ethical. Fields are now trying to transform into sustainable systems that protect biodiversity, manage water carefully, and operate with fair trade. Perhaps the solution does not lie in laboratory tubes, but in returning to the very beginning of the story. To see sugar not as a food, but as a spice. To place it not in every meal, but as the precious crown of rare moments, celebrations, and holidays, just as our ancestors once did. Because history teaches us this: sweetness is magical only when it is rare. From the rainforests of New Guinea to the laboratories of the space age, one truth has not changed. As long as humanity exists, it will continue to seek the whisper of sweetness. But now we know this: the sweetest life is not the one filled with sugar, but the one built on balance. And behind that tiny, innocent-looking white crystal on your plate lies a massive epic of 10,000 years that destroyed empires, changed maps, and shaped millions of lives. The next time you add sugar to your coffee or take a bite of your favorite dessert, pause for a moment. What you feel on your tongue is not just a simple sweetness. It is the storms from across the oceans, the secrets of alchemists and human history itself. Thank you for joining us on this sweet yet bittersweet journey. If this story left a caramelized taste in your mind, we hope to see you in the next adventure to discover the other hidden recipes of history. And stay sweet, but stay balanced.